Somewhere around 3,000 years ago, a poet we call Homer sat down and told the story of a man trying to get home from a war. It should have been a simple journey. Instead, it took him 10 years. And along the way, he ran into a one-eyed giant, a witch who turned his men into pigs, an island of cannibals, a monster with 6 heads, and a stretch of sea that swallowed ships whole. For most of history, we've filed all of this under myth. Fun, but made up. The imagination of a poet with no rules and a lot of time. But here's the thing about Homer. He doesn't invent from nothing. Again and again, when you dig beneath one of his monsters, you find something real underneath. A real place, a real danger, a real fragment of history, dressed up in the language of legend. The giant, the witch, the whirlpool. They're not just fantasy. They may be encoded memories. Real things the ancient world had encountered, turned into images vivid enough to survive 3,000 years of retelling. And Homer was so good at it that these monsters became the blueprint, the templates for storytelling that the entire Western world would borrow and reuse and never stop telling. So in this video, we're going to do something Homer didn't expect anyone to do. We're going to decode the monsters, one by one, and find the real world hiding inside each of them. And to learn how, we start with the most famous trick in the whole story. One that was never a monster at all. The war is over. 10 years of siege and the great city of Troy still stands. Until one morning, the Greeks are simply gone, sailed away. And on the plain outside the walls, they've left behind a single enormous wooden horse. You know the rest. The Trojans drag it inside as a trophy. That night, Greek soldiers hidden in its belly climb out, open the gates, and Troy falls at last. It's one of the most famous images in all of storytelling. And it is almost certainly not true. At least, not the way it's told. Because think about it for a moment. A giant hollow horse, big enough to hide a squad of soldiers, and an entire city just wheels it indoors. As history, it strains belief, but as something else, as a memory of how Troy really fell, wrapped inside an image, it suddenly makes sense. Look at what the horse might actually be hiding. Some have suggested it was a siege engine, a battering ram or assault tower, often covered in wet horsehide, exactly the kind of machine that would have breached a city's walls. Others point to the horse as a sacred symbol of Poseidon, who was god not only of the sea, but of earthquakes. And we know from the ground itself that Troy was struck by earthquakes. A wall shattered by the horse of Poseidon may be the literal truth. Retold as a wooden gift, we may never know which explanation is right, but that isn't the point. The point is the shape of the thing. A real event, the fall of a real city, survives not as a dry record, but as an unforgettable picture. The fact gets compressed into an image, and the image is what lasts. That is exactly how Homer works. And once you know to look for it, you can follow Odysseus out onto the open sea and start turning his monsters back into the world that made them. Odysseus leaves Troy with 12 ships and a victorious crew, and the very first thing that happens on the voyage home is the least mythical thing in the entire poem. They raid a city. The Cicones were a real people, a Thracian tribe from the northern coast of the Aegean who really did exist in exactly the place Homer puts them. Odysseus's men storm their town, take its plunder, and then, drunk and slow to leave, get caught by a Ciconian counterattack that kills dozens of them and drives the survivors back to sea. There are no monsters here, no magic, just a Bronze Age raid that goes well and then badly. The kind of thing that happened constantly in this world of raiders and coastal towns. And that's exactly why it's worth starting here, because it tells us the voyage begins in reality. Homer plants his story in a real sea, among real peoples, before the coastline starts to twist into legend. From here on, the further Odysseus sails from the known world, the stranger things get. Blown off course, Odysseus lands on a coast where the people eat only one thing, the fruit of the lotus. and any of his men who taste it lose all desire to leave. They forget their homes, their families, the journey. They want nothing but to stay and eat and forget. For centuries, readers assumed this was pure invention, but ancient writers themselves tried to locate it. And most pointed to the same stretch of North African coast, around modern Libya and the island of Jerba off Tunisia, where a real plant grew that people really did eat. What was the lotus? We can't be certain. The candidates are all real and all telling. The fruit of the jujube, a sweet narcotic, the opium poppy, or a psychoactive water lily. Any of them could dull a sailor's will and blur his memory. Homer may be describing a genuine encounter with a mind-altering plant, the first time Greek sailors met a drug that made men forget who they were. But notice what the image really carries. This isn't a monster that kills you. It's a temptation that erases you. The danger of comfort, of giving up, of forgetting home when home is the whole point. The threat has become psychological, and that idea, paradise as a trap, is one the Western imagination never let go of. This is the one everyone remembers. Odysseus and his men take shelter in a cave, only to find it belongs to Polyphemus, a giant with a single enormous eye in the middle of his forehead, who traps them inside and begins eating them one by one. Odysseus blinds the monster with a sharpened stake and escapes by hiding his men beneath the giant's own sheep. A one-eyed giant is about as mythical as it gets, but there may be a startling physical explanation for where that image came from, and it was buried in the ground the ancient Greeks walked on. Across the Mediterranean islands where these stories are set, Sicily, Cyprus, Crete, Malta, the earth holds fossils. Specifically, the fossilized skulls of dwarf elephants, a species that once lived on these islands and died out in the ancient past. And a dwarf elephant's skull, if you've never seen a living elephant, is a deeply unsettling object. It's large and roughly human in its proportions, but dead center, where you'd expect the face, there's a single vast opening, the hole where the trunk once attached. To an ancient Greek who had never seen an elephant, who had no framework for what this creature was, that skull reads as one thing: the head of an enormous humanoid with a single central eye. Find one of those weathering out of a hillside and you don't think extinct elephant. You think, here lies a giant, a one-eyed giant. The theory is that the Cyclops was reverse-engineered from bones, a real fossil, interpreted by people without paleontology, who solved the mystery with a monster. It's worth being honest. This is a theory, not a proven fact, and some scholars are cautious about tying it too neatly to Homer's specific lines. But we know the ancient world found these bones, and we know how they explained such things, because there's a record of a Greek in Sicily, centuries later, looking at giant fossil bones and concluding they belonged to a race of giants killed by the gods. The instinct is documented. Faced with monstrous bones, the ancient mind built monsters. And there may be a second layer too. The Cyclopes are described as brutish, lawless herdsmen living in isolation, each in his own cave, with no laws and no community. That may be a memory of something entirely human, the encounter between seafaring Greeks and remote pastoral peoples who lived beyond the edge of the civilized world, remembered and exaggerated into monsters. The next island belongs to Aeolus, keeper of the winds, a figure who gives Odysseus a great bag containing all the storm winds so he can sail home on a gentle breeze. His crew, thinking it's treasure, open the bag in sight of home. The winds burst out and the storm blows them all the way back. The keeper of the winds sounds like pure fantasy, but there's a real place behind him. Off the coast of Sicily lie the Aeolian Islands, named after this very myth, and they are volcanic. One of them, Stromboli, has been erupting almost continuously for thousands of years. A cone in the sea that rumbles, smokes, and throws fire into the sky. Imagine trying to explain that. In an age before geology, an island that breathes, roars, and hurls flame. an obvious home for a god who controls the forces of the air. The winds had to be kept somewhere. Here was an island that looked and sounded exactly like the place they were kept. Odysseus's fleet sails into a sheltered harbour ringed by high cliffs, and it's a trap. The Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals, stand on the heights and hurl boulders down onto the ships, smashing them and spearing the men in the water like fish. Of 12 ships, only Odysseus's own escapes. It's the single worst disaster of the voyage. Strip away the giants and what's left is horribly plausible. Ancient writers place the Laestrygonians in real locations, the coasts of Sicily and Sardinia. And the scene describes something real sailors genuinely feared. A narrow harbour with high sides, easy to sail into, impossible to escape if the locals turn hostile. Coastal peoples who killed intruders and took everything they carried. The cannibalism may be exaggeration, or a memory of encountering tribes whose customs horrified the Greeks. Either way, the real terror here isn't fantasy. It's the oldest fear of the seafarer, sailing into an unknown shore and finding that the people there want you dead. On the island of Aeolus, Odysseus's men are welcomed into the home of a beautiful woman named Circe. She feeds them a feast, and with a touch of her wand, turns them into pigs. It's the classic image of the witch, and it may be one of the oldest in Western literature. But look closely at how Homer describes what she actually does, because it's more precise than you'd expect. Homer calls Circe polypharmakos, a word that means knowing many drugs. She doesn't just wave a wand, she mixes her victims a potion, cheese, barley, honey, wine, and stirs pharmaca into it, drugs. Only then, once they've drunk, does she strike them with the wand. The transformation follows the dose. And here the ancient world hands us something remarkable. The plants that grew in the Greek world included some of the most potent mind-altering substances known, and one family in particular, the nightshades like datura and mandrake, does something very specific to the human mind. In the wrong dose, they cause hallucinations, delirium, and amnesia. A person under their influence can lose themselves entirely, can be convinced they've become something other than human, and remember none of it afterward. Men who believe, in their delirium, that they are animals. Circe may be a memory of real pharmacology, the encounter with a woman who understood plants and their power in an age when that knowledge could look exactly like magic. But the detail that seals it is the cure. To protect himself, Odysseus is given a herb by the god Hermes, a plant called moly, black at the root with a white flower, said to make him immune to Circe's drugs. For a long time, moly was assumed to be pure invention. Then modern scientists identified a real plant that fits Homer's description, the snowdrop, and discovered it contains a compound that counteracts exactly the kind of poisoning the nightshades cause. A real antidote to a real drug, named in a 3,000-year-old poem. Homer, it turns out, may have known his pharmacology better than we ever gave him credit for. Then come the Sirens, creatures whose song is so beautiful that any sailor who hears it steers toward them and wrecks his ship on the rocks. Odysseus has his men plug their ears with wax and lashes himself to the mast so he can hear the song and survive it. And here, honestly, the trail goes colder than anywhere else on the voyage. There's no fossil to point to, no drug, no single island everyone agrees on. What there is a feeling every ancient sailor knew, that the sea can lure you to your death, and that the most dangerous waters are often the most beautiful. Some read the Sirens as the pull of hidden reefs and treacherous currents, where the calm and lovely surface hides the thing that kills you. But maybe the Sirens were never meant to be decoded into a single object. Maybe they're the purest example of what Homer does best, taking an abstract universal fear, the fear of your own desires leading you to ruin, and giving it a voice and a face. Not every monster is a memory. Some are just truth in the shape of a story. And so we come to the last and most dangerous passage of all, a narrow strait guarded by two monsters, one on each side. On one side is Scylla, 6 heads, 12 groping arms, reaching down from a cliff to pluck sailors off the decks of passing ships. On the other is Charybdis, a vast whirlpool that 3 times a day swallows the entire sea and vomits it back up. To survive, Odysseus has to thread the gap between them, and he does. But Scylla takes 6 of his men as he passes. Of every location in the Odyssey, this is the one the ancient world was most certain about, and modern geography backs them up. This is the Strait of Messina, the narrow channel between Italy and Sicily, and it is genuinely, measurably dangerous. Where 2 seas meet in a tight passage, powerful and unpredictable currents form, and real whirlpools strong enough to frighten sailors for thousands of years appear on the Sicilian side, exactly where Charybdis is said to lurk. There is even, on the mainland shore, a town still called Scylla to this day. Now, the honest caveat. The real whirlpools of Messina are dangerous to small boats in the wrong conditions, but they don't literally swallow ships whole. As so often with Homer, the danger is real, and then magnified into a monster. The strait genuinely could kill you. The 6 heads are the poetry, and there's a beautiful detail that ties the whole voyage together. When Greek sailors first pushed west into these waters, they arrived already carrying Homer's monsters in their heads, and they pinned the names onto the coastline they found. The map didn't create the myth. The myth was laid over the map by sailors looking for the legend in the real world, which is exactly what we've been doing, in reverse, this whole time. So what really inspired the monsters of the Odyssey? Not one single thing. A fossil in a hillside, a drug in a cup, a volcano, a whirlpool, a hostile shore, a plant that made men forget. Real places, real dangers, real fragments of a Bronze Age world. Each one compressed into an image vivid enough to outlast the civilization that made it. That was Homer's genius. He took the world as his sailors actually found it. Beautiful and lethal and strange, and he turned it into monsters. And those monsters became the raw material for almost every story the West has told since. The hero against the giant, the enchantress. The temptation you must not answer. The narrow escape between 2 deadly perils. We are still telling these stories today. We just don't always remember where they came from. If you enjoyed the journey, subscribe and tell us which myth we should decode next. And remember, the past is closer than it looks.